Good. All right, welcome. This is, I believe, our ninth class of Wheel of Sharp Weapons. So getting into kind of the home stretch, let's go ahead and start with prayers as usual. I need to have screen sharing, please. Thank you. Um, still waiting on screen sharing. So still don't have screen sharing. I'm not sure why. There we go. Got it. Thank you. Okay, let's recite the praise to Shakyamuni Buddha one time together. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan. I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. Short mandala offering. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, four continents, the sun, and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. And then finally, refuge in bodhicitta, first time in English, and then twice more in the Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye Chodam Soki Choknam La Jangchu Bardu Dakni Kyapsu Chi Daki Chenyen Gipe Sonamgi Dola Penchir Sangye Druparsho Sangye Chodam Soki Choknam La Jangchu Bardu Dakni Kyapsu Chi Daki Chenyen Gipe Sonamgi Dola Penchir Sangye Druparsho. Okay, let's do a short meditation. First few minutes, meditating on the breath, calm the mind, and then I'll come in and lead you in setting motivation. So I'm not going to ring the bell here, my bowl, because I don't think anyone hears it on the other end, and it's good for me. But anyway, it's just the way that Zoom is set up. As soon as there's like a sharp noise like that, it just doesn't pick it up. So we'll just start. Imagine your own sort of chime in your head, and then begin to watch the breath. So now let's set our motivation. As you know, we started this section recently where we're looking at particular attitudes and behaviors that demonstrate the way that especially self-cherishing takes over in our minds. Previously, we looked at the results that we experience and interpreted those in terms of the behavior that we must have engaged in. Now we're looking at these behaviors, these thoughts that we have, and the actions that follow from them, trying to identify the way in which this demon of self-cherishing manifests. So rather than working with any of them that we've covered, I'd like you just to spend a minute or so to look at your own patterns of behavior, especially those things that you're more habituated towards, where you can clearly see the way that self-cherishing is behind those thoughts that you engage in, attitudes you have, certain behaviors, ways of being around others, what have you, where you can see that you get quite tightly focused on yourself and your own well-being and exclude the welfare of others. And we're not trying to beat ourselves up with this. We're trying to identify the enemy, this demon, so we can clearly see it and then try to destroy it. Just spend a minute or so reflecting on your own behavior, those things you're more habituated towards. And then also examine the way that that is harmful to others potentially. Or if it's an action where it doesn't seem that the harm to others is that obvious. Think about the fact that whenever we follow that mind of self-cherishing, it's generally going to induce some delusions, some afflictions. We're becoming more and more distant from the goal of enlightenment. We're becoming kind of blocked to achieving our potential and therefore to benefiting other sentient beings. So whether it harms others in the moment or whether it simply removes us from the possibility of becoming enlightened more quickly, it does do some harm to others. Following the mind of self-cherishing does lead to some detrimental effects on other beings. So reflect on that for a little bit. Then invoke Yamantaka, which, as we recall, there's an external Yamantaka, which are the beings that are there to help us, but we're mostly here working with our own internal Yamantaka, the mind of conventional bodhicitta that is our motivation for being here tonight. And especially working with that, though also invoking ultimate bodhicitta, the mind that overcomes our self-grasping, that is the deeper error that is together with that mind of self-cherishing frequently. And try to bring both of those minds together and really want to be free of that pattern, that habit. It is clear evidence that we are still under the control of these twin demons. And generate the mind of bodhicitta very strongly, your own sort of, again, internal Yamantaka that will destroy the mind of self-cherishing. Because it's a mind that is focused on the welfare of others and wanting to become a Buddha for their sake. And just hold that motivation very strongly, feeling it as a force that can help you to decrease the tendency for that habitual behavior to arise, can help you to be more focused on the goal of enlightenment and the welfare of others. Now, when you're ready, you can open your eyes fully and we'll begin. So again, in this section, there's the first two lines of each of these verses that are kind of setting forward sometimes one, sometimes two different behaviors or attitudes that we have that we are, again, using as evidence that we've been under the control of this mind of self-cherishing, especially, though also, again, we're frequently putting both of those twin demons together, self-cherishing and self-grasping. And then in the last two lines, we have that refrain of invoking Yamantaka, which again is most powerful when we think about it being our own internal forces of generating the wisdom of emptiness, that is the counter part to the self-grasping that we have, as well as the conventional bodhicitta, the wish to benefit all beings, that is the counter force to our mind that cherishes ourselves to the exclusion of others. So I do have some slides to share tonight, but I'm mostly going to stay with the text. So let's go forward. Whoops, how did I do that? What happened there? I don't know where things are at here. Let me stop the share again. I'm not sure what's showing on your screen. On my screen, I had a bunch of other stuff coming up. Let me go back to the PDF file, which is where I was trying to be. I don't know what that is. Oh, that's the other prayers. So maybe somehow, are you seeing? Okay, you should be seeing the commentary with verse 61 at the top. If you're not, if someone can come in and let me know, because otherwise I must have something screwy with the screen share. Okay, so this is verse 61. We left off with verse 60 last time. Our acharyas, acharya is a Sanskrit word that means kind of master, a spiritual master, our gurus, are many, yet our pledges, obligations, and friends are few. Our students are many, yet we benefit and protect them inadequately. So the idea here is that when we have kind of these two groups of companions, those who are our teachers and those who are our students, those who follow us, we find that even though we have people playing that role for us, the benefits don't accrue. So let's look at what Geshe-la says. He says, when students rely on a lama, those who are dull facultied should not rely upon many lamas, but instead try to rely, by means of a completely pure manner of reliance, on just one or two. This is the ideal advice that's given. Yet, Lama Atisha, who again brought this text into Tibet, is said to have had over 200 lamas, 200 gurus. In the beginning, though, it's best to rely on one or two, just a small amount, so we stay very clear in our relationships with them. On the other hand, if we listen to the Dharma from many lamas, Geshe-la says, we should then guard completely pure pledges with respect to all of them. You know, whatever commitments we get from them, whatever advice we receive from them, we should see that all as very important, and we want to hold it at that level. Obligations in that first line means that when we meditate and so forth, we should carry our lama on our crown and meditate, and we should also carry the advice taught us by these verses on our crown. It just kind of, that's what it means, you know, when we listen to teachings from someone we consider to be our guru, which again is in our court, we determine those beings who they are, then we should ideally take what they say as obligations and try to carry it on our crown, carry them on our crown, meaning hold them in a very revered place. And it says, since friends, also in that same line, are the friends in relatives and friends, we should view our lamas to be the best of all friends, right? You know, to make sure that we honor that relationship and keep it intact. The opposite to that is having requested many lamas for the Dharma and so forth, to deprecate them, belittle them and the like, without having any other pledges, obligations, and friends. So again, the idea here is that we can have these many high beings in our lives, but if we don't honor and respect the pledges and obligations that we make, and really honor the friendship, spiritual friendship that we have with these beings, then we're doing that relationship a disservice. The second line that has to do with students, he says, in addition, when a lama relies on students, the lama should investigate them, well without considering reliance to be easy. Again, they do say that anyone who we take as a student, and many people don't feel like they're ready to take someone as a student, that they're not at that level, but you should check them out to make sure that they're going to be someone who will honor that relationship in terms of following the advice that you're giving them. Then it says, after relying on them one time, he should benefit them by means of the Dharma that accords with their mental aptitude as well as with material things, and should protect them adequately, that is, skillfully. So someone who is in the role of being a spiritual guide for others should try to give the appropriate Dharma in line with their mental disposition, as well as provide them with what material support they can, what protection, and so on. Practice generosity towards those students. The opposite to this is, due to desiring a good reputation, fame, and so forth for ourselves, to enjoy gathering many students, but after gathering them, to engage in doing whatever we want and so forth, without being skilled in the ways to protect them with the Dharma and material things. This being to protect them inadequately, which was in our second line of that verse. So again, I'm not going to read this for all of them. I'll read it for this first one. Having seen that the one who makes us do this is also our self-cherishing, as before we say, rant and rave on the head of the conception that brings about our ruin, to the hearts of the enemy, the self, and the executioner, Maraya. Again, Maraya means kill them, get rid of them, these two horrible minds that have just been the source of so much problem and difficulty for us. I realized I did forget to share a little kind of advice stuff from the beginning of my slides. And this is from Venerable Chodron again. She has such wonderful advice in there. She says, and this is, fine, we'll do this now and can think about the verse that you just heard, as well as all the remaining ones we look at tonight. These verses are a good tool for self-examination. And that's why I encouraged you in the meditation tonight to do a little bit of examination with regard to whatever it is that you find to be your pattern of self-cherishing that manifests more habitually in terms of particular behaviors or attitudes. She says, as uncomfortable as it may be for us to see in ourselves the behaviors and attitudes described here, we ask ourselves, what is the mechanism that makes this happen? Can we see the way that self-cherishing and, of course, the deeper root of self-grasping are behind the scene? It is definitely self-grasping ignorance and self-centered thought. Then we do more in-depth research. How is my self-centered thought manifesting in this way? What's the pattern here? And how does it play out in other aspects of my life? Because we are, every one of us, I'm sure, following these minds in various ways that we go about living our lives. And it becomes problematic sometimes in terms of causing more direct harm to others. But as I said in the motivation tonight, it even can keep us from advancing forward because we get stuck in this groove of self-cherishing. Wanting to change our bad habits, we investigate. The next time I start to get into this pattern, how can I catch it when it's still small? How else could I think so that I don't continuously repeat the same foolish behavior? Again, what we're trying to adopt as part of this course is to think in an opposing way. And this is the whole point of the whole concept of antidotes and, in Buddhism. She says, then we come up with a plan that we put into effect whenever we notice a specific unproductive emotion or behavior, right? You have to have that determination. Okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to confront and avert it with this particular pattern, with this new way of looking at things, this plan. So that's the idea behind it, is to kind of use these verses as an opportunity to investigate, as well as this entire course, and an opportunity to investigate the ways that we get stuck with these patterns of self-cherishing. So again, that was the first verse. Let's go on and read the next verse, verse 62 from here. Our commitments are great, yet our beneficial practice is small. Our reputation is great, yet when examined would bear us the deities and spirits. So again, it ends with that same refrain. Let's go back to Geshe-la's commentary and see what he says on this. Some of these do have some kind of similar concepts, around commitments and what have you. But Geshe-la says, having taken then the individual liberation, what are again called the pratimoksha vows, the bodhisattva vows, or the tantric vows, through summoning the Buddhas and bodhisattvas to be our witnesses, we have committed ourselves to protect all the coarse and subtle trainings of these vows, and have promised to achieve Buddhahood for the welfare of all sentient beings, and so forth. Thus, our commitments are very great. Again, I think I've touched on vows already in this course, and it is good to check up these vows. I did teach all of you on the Bodhisattva vows, even a little bit on the lay vows of the Pratimoksha. Tantric vows, again, you cannot study fully until you attain or you get a tantric empowerment of highest yoga tantra. But nonetheless, we should be checking up and making sure the commitments that we're taking, what are they? How do we keep them? How do we assure that we don't have transgressions? Then the next line, however, through separating from and dropping all the pledges that are to be guarded, we do not show even a little bit of practice that would be of definite benefit to ourselves and others. So again, the idea behind this one is that even though we have many of these commitments, the practice we put in that would be beneficial by following those commitments, being attentive to them, it doesn't happen because we're neglecting those vows. We're not keeping our mindful awareness, our guarding alertness around avoiding the downfalls. It says then in the next paragraph, in addition, although externally lamas, tulkus, geshes, and so forth have a great reputation, and some of us may feel like we've got a good reputation in a more mundane way, but this is beings who have a high reputation in terms of their being great teachers, very well learned scholars, what have you. It says, if covertly their continuum in behavior were to be examined, and this happens often, or maybe not as often as it can happen with just regular practitioners, but if they aren't living up to the principles that they're teaching, as it says here, they would embarrass even the evil spirits, without need to mention the supramundane and mundane deities. So even like the evil spirits whose behavior is pretty lousy, they might embarrass them by virtue of not living up to the commitments and the kind of ways of practicing that they are teaching. One of the ways that we guide disciples, guide disciples, there are said to be the four means of kind of gathering and helping disciples. And one of them, I don't need to go through all of them, but one of them is to practice what you preach. So if you are even someone who is trying to help your friends with practicing the Dharma, and you want to give that advice, well, then you have to try to follow that advice yourself. Otherwise, when people see that someone has told them to do something, but they're doing something different, well, then they don't have much faith and confidence in that, right? This happened as when we were kids, probably when we looked at our parents. But what would our parents say if they were doing something different to what the advice was they gave us? They'd say, well, do as I say, not as I do, right? I think I heard that a number of times from my parents. And that's comes off kind of hollow, right? If someone says, oh, do this, do that, but they're not doing it themselves, they're not following that advice themselves, it's not very inspiring for us. So again, we want to make sure that our behavior lines up with the ideals that we are teaching to others, or that we are professing to follow in terms of our own Dharma practice, or that at least we're honest when we talk about it, to admit to our faults, to admit that we still are under the control of these factors and don't have perfect behavior and what have you. Having that humility is also important, rather than putting on airs and trying to make people think that you're such a great practitioner or scholar or what have you. Okay, I don't think there was anything more to share on that. Let's go to the next verse. This is verse 63. We will kind of truck through these, I hope, tonight, because we do have a little bit of catching up to do. And there were quite a few verses that I have on my schedule for tonight anyway. But these are actually, not so difficult bits where you might need to explain a little more. The first line, the extent of our hearing is small, yet our boastful empty talk is great. So we might have really just heard minimal amounts of Dharma, or don't really have the learning that we would ideally like to have, yet we have a lot of empty talk that we boast and pretend to have all of this great learning. Then secondly, the extent of our scriptural knowledge is small, yet we say we have realized all that is not yet realized. So this is the idea, is that you're kind of putting on airs and saying that you have these great realizations, even though your scriptural knowledge is pretty minimal. So Geshe-la says, in commenting on this, for example, when people who possess hearing and thinking, remember these are the first two wisdoms that we put forward as three wisdom of hearing, thinking, and then meditating. When they're asked a question about the Dharma by lay people and so forth, they do not give an answer that is other than whatever is fitting out of the thought, oh, the questioner does not know the precise meaning. So aside from them, when a question is made to charlatans, the pseudo-practitioners of modern times, who are directly seen to be great boasters of empty talk about the way in which it is necessary to posit that, for example, nothing functions in the state of emptiness, the mode of abidance, and how, since the mind that realizes that is a Buddha, it is not necessary to seek another Buddhahood. In other words, you're already a Buddha because your mind has a Buddha nature or something. They reply out of a small amount of hearing. So the idea here is that, when you're dealing, especially with people who don't know the Dharma so much, you might think that you can just give any sort of answer that you want, and you might make things up out of your kind of arrogance and misperception of your own learning. It really takes a great amount of learning to feel some confidence in being able to put teachings forward. I know when I began teaching, I actually started with a few teachings I did before finishing the master's program, and those were incredibly nerve-wracking because I was so afraid of saying something wrong. And you do have to be conscientious when you're giving the Dharma to others to make sure that you're conveying it as it is set out and not kind of changing it into some other teaching. And when we're working with people who are from other traditions, sometimes it is useful to perhaps use different language, but don't put on airs and think that you're giving some great teaching when what you're giving is actually just you're like a charlatan. You're just leading people on with various things that don't make any sense, that aren't even grounded in the teachings. The one line in there about saying that everything doesn't function within emptiness, that there's kind of a lack of that functioning. Well, this is the exact opposite, right? It is within emptiness that everything does function. This is the principle of dependent arising. We'll talk about that a little later in this course, but the idea is that we have to not convey things that are mistruths or even distortions of the truth to any degree as much as we can, because we want to maintain that integrity again of the Dharma. So I always heard that the three most important words to know as a person who's teaching the Dharma or as a person who is trying to convey the Dharma to others is, I don't know. That's very important, that at times we practice that and just say, but I don't know. I'm sorry, I don't have the answer for you. And then maybe say, I'll check with my teachers and see what they have to say about that question. But, we have to have that kind of humility and be very honest with our own skills and abilities and not kind of make things up or say things that are faulty. Then the next part, second line, in addition, when someone has the highest degree of hearing and thinking, it is not possible for them to be devoid of scriptural knowledge and logical reasoning. However, when those who are devoid of scriptural knowledge and logic reasoning, by the force of lacking that highest degree of hearing and thinking, explain the Dharma and so forth to others, they trick others by means of various lies about their having realized that which they have not yet realized. Alternatively, to have realized all that is not yet realized in that second line is, for example, while one does not have even a single scrap of excellent knowledge concerning the Dharma of the Sakya, Geluk, Nyingma, and Kagyu, which are again the four Tibetan schools of Tibetan Buddhism, one pretends in others' perspective to be expert in all of them, and looking at a tiny bit from all traditions, talks as if one were explaining bits and pieces from them. So again, this is also important. Some people may come to you and have questions about things they've heard about from other traditions. For example, the practice of Dzogchen, which is used in the Nyingma tradition. If you haven't studied Dzogchen and don't have any knowledge of it, then be honest with people. Don't start saying, oh, well, I'm guessing it's something like this or whatever, and just put it off as, your knowledge when your knowledge of it is really not there at all. It's important once more to have that kind of integrity when we're teaching the Dharma to others. So both of these lines kind of fit together in terms of kind of working with the whole concept of having some pretension around having great knowledge or great skill and what have you, and you're putting forward a false view. This is obviously, again, now we have to eat with each of these. I'm not doing this as much as I go through the commentary, but go back and examine, how does self-cherishing play a role there? Well, again, it's because we want others to think better of us, perhaps. We want to develop some kind of reputation by others saying, "Oh, they're such a learned scholar." When he said, "Nothing functions in emptiness," it sounded so profound. Well, you know, but that's not the truth. So we have to be careful how much our self-cherishing guides us into wanting people to admire us, wanting people to look up to us, or to make offerings to us, or whatever the case might be. Just these kinds of uh, ulterior motives that are being driven by the self-cherishing mind, that are all about me wanting to protect my own interests and not being concerned about what the other person is getting in that dharma exchange. So again, it's good occasionally as you go through these to even do your own investigation to see how the mind of self-cherishing is playing a role in this. Let me jump back to the slides just to make sure I'm not skipping any additional commentary. Let's go on then to verse 64. Our servants are many. Again, servants can also mean kind of companions, those beings who are kind of involved with us and supporting us to some degree. Yet none of them takes any responsibility. Our masters, so our bosses, whoever, the people that are superiors to us, are many. Yet we are without a supporter and protector. I found this one kind of curious. This is the only one, I believe, in this whole section that almost sounds like it should be in the first section of like showing a karma, because you can say, well, I've got all these people that are there to support me, yet they don't take any responsibility. I'm kind of bereft of any of the support that they're supposed to give me. And we have many teachers or masters or people who are above us, yet they don't support and protect us. This one is a little strange in that regard because it does seem to be more of a karmic result as opposed to a behavior, which again, this section is all about the behaviors that we're engaging in. But we do see that a little bit playing out in terms of the commentary that Geshe-la gives us and the sorts of behaviors that lead to those sorts of results. So Geshe-la says, even though great lamas and lords, for instance, have many servants, if they protect them with food, clothing, and so forth, but leave them to do as they wish without distinguishing between good and bad actions, eventually they will become equal in voice and equal in hands to the lama and lords, without there being any one of them who takes responsibility. So we see this idea that if we are going to have people that are, I don't know if subservient is quite the right term, but people who we're kind of tending to because they are in that role as being servants, supporters, what have you. I guess, again, it could be students in terms of a teacher. Then we might, do some things for them, protect them with various things, but yet don't give them the advice they really need, which is to help tame their minds through knowing the difference between good and bad karma and what have you. So we have to be more meticulous in that type of behavior. So that's kind of the fault here, is where we are not tending to the real care of others. Rather, we might be very superficially involved in their care. And then it says for the second line, in addition, for some people, many supporters and protectors appear. For a while, these people pretend to side with many overall bosses, personal bosses, and the like. But then, when they need supporters and protectors, they find themselves amid those who think he will do it, she will do it, without even a single person to support and protect them. So the idea here is that you kind of give up the desire to help those who are in a superior position to you as well. You don't kind of tend to them, having seen that the support that they give you is so valuable. So these two lines kind of become all about, well, are we really genuinely taking care of beings who are involved in our care? Those who support us, as well as those who we are supported by, who are superior to us. It's reciprocal all the way. If we simply rest and don't take responsibility for doing what needs to be done to repay the kindness of these beings, and again, in as genuine a way as we can, with those who lack the support of the Dharma, to try to give them that distinguishing clarity between what is good, what is bad, and so on. And for those who are our superiors, to make sure that we come when they need assistance and aid, so that we continue to receive the support from them. Again, we don't do it with that selfish attitude of like, oh, I want to make sure I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine kind of thing. Instead, we do it because we see that the interdependence of all of this, and we have to keep creating that type of karma that is about cherishing others. Whether people are superior to us or inferior to us, they're all involved in your welfare. So don't think that kind of, you can neglect people. Um, let me see if there was anything else. Yeah, I think that was all on my notes that I wanted to say on that one. And again, it's kind of an interesting one because the way it's worded, it does start sounding like it's more of a karmic result that we have that is dependent upon the types of actions that we engaged in the past. Number 65, we have great status, yet our qualities are less than a spirit's. We are great lamas, yet our attachment and hatred are rougher than Mara's. So the idea is here is like, whatever our status might be or the position that we're holding where we have a great reputation, if we aren't paying attention to the qualities that we should be generating, there's some duplicity involved in that, right? We're pretending to be something that we aren't. We're deceiving others. Our hatred and attachment, it says here, are rougher than Mara's, meaning particularly the son of the gods, the Deva Putra. We talked about this Deva Putra previously, which is a being that kind of incites afflictions in others, which is indicative of the afflictions of that being, that son of the gods. Geshe-la says, no matter how great our status is, due to lacking good qualities, we will not go anywhere. In addition, while we hold the name of a great Lama, Geshe, and so forth, our attachment and hatred are rougher even than Mara's. The Mara in this context should be taken to be the joyous Lord. This is again a term used for this son of the gods, the Deva Putra. Recall that in the four Maras, I'll take it off screen for just a moment, we had those four Maras I introduced you to. Three of them are the internal Maras, in a sense, those that are part of our being. These are the forces that we do have to contend with. The Mara of the afflictions being the main one, the Mara of death, which is that we are all subject to that impermanence, and the Mara of the aggregates, being kind of bound to this body and mind and this existence that becomes kind of a demon in and of itself. And then a fourth one is this Deva Putra, which again, it does seem to be, from the way they present it, another being, but that being would be, again, not some malevolent force that just shows up willy-nilly, but it shows up because you've created the karma for it to be interfered by that being. Remember, I talked about how it has like some sort of an arrow symbolically. I think that it kind of shoots you with an arrow that causes attachment to arise, great attachment or great anger, whatever. So we see it's still quite very caught up in the delusions and our own patterns around delusions. But we might feel those at times where we see suddenly something arising very strongly in us. And that could be, again, some karma we've created around these beings. But these beings, obviously, they're malevolent in that way because they themselves are afflicted. They're not free of all of that type of behavior. They're not some sort of super mundane gods or whatever. This is still a samsaric being that is, again, up to no good. So we just have to be careful with, again, these sorts of forces in the world and make sure that we don't have behaviors that are similar to them, or worse, as it says here, our attachment and hatred being rougher than Mara's, than, that being's. Okay, let's go on then to the next verse. Again, I don't think I had anything on that. Like I said, I don't have tons of slides with commentary tonight, though a few coming up. Verse 66, our view is lofty, yet our behavior is worse than a dog's. The basis of all our good qualities has been lost in the wind. Actually, the second line is kind of interesting, and I think it's in Good Karma, which again uses the translation from Thupten Jinpa. It says, though my good qualities may be numerous, their basis is lost to the winds. And again, the idea that the basis is kind of our ethical conduct that we have as kind of at the kind of basis of all of our qualities. So we might have the good qualities, but the basis isn't there. The good qualities seem to be there, but we don't practice good ethical behavior in spite of appearing to have these good qualities. It's kind of the idea behind that. Let's go to see what Geshe-la says in his commentary. Nowadays, there are many exalted people who are boastful of their views and who explain that, oh, the non-existent is the not existent. This is kind of like just a silly phrase, like makes you sound really highfalutin, but you're not. You're, again, putting on airs of having such amazing knowledge. Empty is empty, and so forth. just to kind of make people scratch their heads and say, oh, he must be saying something really profound. She must be really knowledgeable because these jewels, these gems of wisdom that are coming out of her mouth are just so amazing. From the perspective of their behavior, they are worse than dogs and pigs in that, having scorned all pledges and vows, actions and results, and so forth, they rely on women, drink alcohol, vomit, and the like. By the force of their behavior, the basis of good qualities is sent away on the wind, and that they lack even one type of morality. So the idea again is that they, through the force of this, even though they propound such great views, those views aren't actually exhibited in their behavior because they probably don't even have such great views when it comes down to it. They're propounding things that are not in line with the Dharma. And through that, their behavior degenerates because they aren't really following those teachings again. It's amazing how many of the verses in this section are all about people who are kind of, again, being a bit duplicitous, kind of putting on airs and behaving in ways that are quite contrary. And it says, incidental to that, all the happiness and pleasure of this and future lives is also lost in the wind. Because where does all the pleasant experience, all those pleasant experiences of this and future lives come from? From your karma, which is your ethical behavior. So we are kind of not creating the causes even to have happiness in this life, much less future lives, if we let the basis of all of our good qualities degenerate, which is again is our ethical conduct. Remember, even in the teachings of the middle scope and the Lam Rim, we have the presentation there of the 3 higher trainings, and they are, a hierarchy. We start with the training in morality. That higher training in morality means meticulous attention to our behavior so that we avoid the non-virtues, we maintain our vows, and so on. On the basis of that, you can develop the higher training of concentration. They say without good morality, you can't even get good concentration because you've disturbed the mind through that behavior, that you don't have a good support for allowing the mind to focus and settle. Because that's mainly what is meant by concentration in that higher training is the stabilizing mind, the mind of calm abiding. Then on the basis of that, you can generate the 3rd higher training, the training in wisdom, which is the special insight into emptiness. That again, in the Bodhisattva path, these are part of the perfections, morality, concentration, wisdom. But on the Hinayana path, they're taught in that hierarchy of the 3 higher trainings to emphasize the importance of the basis of ethical conduct. That's why in the small scope, you're taught about karma. Why? Because you need to start now in really being careful around your behavior. So if we let all of these things degenerate and we start engaging in lots of negative actions, then we're not certainly following the view of the Buddha. We're not following the Dharma, and we're only going to create the cause for future suffering for ourselves. And of course, others will suffer along the way. So this is the idea behind that verse. Again, some of these do start sounding a little similar at times, but slight differences here and there. And 65, 66, I don't think I had anything on those. 67, we keep all our desires, meaning kind of our deluded desires, our attachment, the 8 worldly concerns, and so on, in our innermost heart. We senselessly blame all altercations on others. So it's like we are obsessed with our own welfare and following our own inner desires, and we blame all the problems and difficulties on others, right? It's all their fault. These kind of might sound familiar, again, because we do tend to do that very much. When the mind of self-cherishing is present, we tend to be focused on what I need, again, to the exclusion of others. And the 8 worldly concerns are all about that, right? I want my pleasure and avoiding displeasure. I want my material gain and avoiding any loss. I want my praise and avoiding any criticism or blame. I want my good reputation, avoiding any ill repute. We're doing that because we're driven by satisfying this sense of I that we are driven by. And in the process, we can harm others in acquiring those things and avoiding the opposites. So again, this is something we've touched on before a little bit, these 8 worldly concerns and so on. Let's see what Geshe-la has to say on this. He says, when we practice the completely pure Dharma, we should give all profit and victory to others and take all loss and defeat upon ourselves. In other words, we should do the opposite of the 8 worldly concerns. And those words are actually very similar to verse 5 of the 8 verses of mind training that I've touched on before. It says, when out of envy others mistreat me with insults, abuse, and the like, I shall accept defeat and offer the victory to others. Instead, we want the victory, and to hell with everybody else. We'll give them the defeat. We'll make sure that they lose while we win. But opposite to that, we think, may all desired profit, victory, and the like arise for me. So we don't follow the Dharma. We don't follow these mind training teachings generally. Most beings, that's what we keep in our innermost heart, is our desire for praise, for gain, to avoid loss and bad reputation, all those sorts of things. And it says altercation in B, which will go up just a little bit there. It says we senselessly blame all altercations on others, is a term for a quarrel, the minimum being to senselessly, and as much as one can, lay the responsibility upon others for doing that which they did not do, for talking badly, and so on. We do have a tendency to put the blame on other people quite frequently in our culture. And even if you look at how things happen in the world in larger scale, there's always like that tendency to want to point the finger, right? And sometimes people do it out of a genuine wish to correct things that are wrong in our world, not out of producing this blame and not taking any responsibility. But certainly in our behavior in smaller circles tends to be that type of thing, where we don't recognize how we've contributed to that situation. And of course, from the perspective of karma, who is really to blame? The primary person to blame, if we're going to put blame on anyone, is ourselves for having created sort of the setup, the karmic setup for that to occur. The other person is doing what they're doing, perhaps, and as was said in the verse, they might not be doing anything. But we tend to blame others whenever we have a problem. This is like the total opposite way of thinking in accord with the teachings on karma. That yes, we can acknowledge that there are times when others are the agents of harming us through their behavior. And we can acknowledge that that's a part of the equation. But why are they doing this to you? As we spoke about when we went through the teachings, the verses on karma, it's only because you've created that seed. If you hadn't created that seed, it wouldn't happen to you. I know this is hard. I can't prove this to you. We talked about that previously as well. But the idea is if we always have that mentality, whenever anything happens to us, then we know where the blame is. There's a wonderful slogan from the 7-Point Mind Training by Geshe Chikawa. Banish the one to blame for everything. Banish the one, the self-cherishing mind that's to blame for everything. That's who needs to be voted off the island, right? Get the self-cherishing mind out of here, banish them, get them, out of my mind completely, because that's the one to blame for everything. And not these other people, not the situation. And of course, there's often times where, again, they aren't even necessarily involved, but we still throw blame on them because we don't want to take responsibility ourselves. Again, karma dictates that it's the exact opposite, that we ourselves are the ones that need to be kind of most identified in terms of the responsibility that we have for the situation and so on. We're the one to, and it's our self-cherishing mind that is behind those karmas, those actions that we've created. Verse 68, having dressed in saffron, this is again, those who have become monks, nuns, and so on, we entreat spirits for protection and refuge. Having taken vows, our trainings comply with Mara. Okay, so got Mara appearing here again. Even though this pertains to those who are ordained, we can apply it certainly to our own practice of Buddhism as lay practitioners. Geshe-la says, having requested to become novice monks, fully ordained monks, again, nuns of the same status, and so forth, we dress our bodies in saffron robes. That is, we make a commitment to the Dharma, but then entreat evil spirits and the like for protection and refuge without placing our trust in the three jewels. We're going to have a verse coming a little later that talks about the other things that we might put our trust in. But again, even if we're not ordained, as Buddhists, and I would guess most of you have maybe not taken refuge formally, but you do have a strong sense of refuge in the three jewels and in the Dharma in particular. Well, then that is your protector. Remember, even one of our refuge commitments is to not have other objects of refuge be our final refuge. Our final refuge is the three jewels. And of course, especially the Dharma, because that's the main jewel that we depend upon in our practice. The Buddhas aren't going to get us enlightened through their compassion and love for us and alone. It requires us to actually take the medicine of the Dharma. So this is kind of pointing out that whether you're lay or ordained, it's focusing on ordained. But if you've made a commitment to this being your path, that's your refuge, meaning that's your final protector. That's where you actually find the support that you need to deal with whatever situation. And it's really true. If start practicing in that way, we always find a Dharma teaching that we can apply, regardless of what's going on in our lives, rather than making some sort of appeal to other things for protection. It says here, evil spirits. I don't know. Again, some of us might not have conviction in these sorts of beings, but it can be anyone who we kind of go to, and you say, oh, well, I think they'll give me really good advice, even though it's completely outside of the Dharma, and it might not even be in line with the Dharma. Then it says here, and for the second line, having taken the individual liberation, Bodhisattva, and Tantra vows, we comply with the behavior of Mara, the joyous Lord. Again, that son of the gods who is Devaputra, who is malevolent and has really deluded mind, without training in the trainings of those vows. And then it says here, alternatively, Mara can be taken as before to be the self-cherishing, that self-cherishing thought with which, through conforming, we create only negative non-virtues. Our negative actions come about through the force of that self-cherishing mind. So again, the purpose of vows, and I might just mention here, I have talked a little bit about vows even earlier tonight, is to protect our minds from the behavior and things that will lead us astray. Many people, when they hear the word vows, they think, oh God, this is going to be like this huge burden that I have to carry on my shoulders all the time. Now I've taken these vows, now it's going to weigh me down. It's the exact opposite. It kind of defines the narrow path that you need to follow by putting all the stuff that you don't want to do to the side. These are the things you avoid. These are the things that are not going to help you. This is the pathway through. It's like a real blessing to have these vows. And of course, these vows go back to Buddha Shakyamuni. And of course, we're from previous Buddhas all the way back through beginningless time. We don't have any beginning to those vows, but they are the gift of the Buddha in terms of our practice of morality. And so we should be very serious when we take those and have a strong commitment to make our behavior accord with them. Otherwise, again, our behavior is going to be closer to Amaras rather than what they are intending to do, which is to keep us moving in the direction of Buddhahood, of liberation and enlightenment. Okay. So again, I'm just skipping over that last little paragraph. That's the same for all of these. Verse 69, having been given happiness and pleasure by the deities, we make offering to evil spirits. Here come those evil spirits again. Having practiced the guiding Dharma, we deceive the jewels. So again, we have a similar type of thing. A lot of the verses in this section do have some commonalities and might sound like they're talking about exactly the same thing, though there's shades of difference in terms of the meaning. The first one, to have been given the happiness and pleasure of this and future lives by the deities, is to have practiced the teachings of the deity of deities, the Muni, the Buddha Bhagawan. So if we really think about it, all the good things that we have in our lives, all the good fortune that we are currently experiencing, and I can say in teaching all of you here in this country where you have a very fairly comfortable life, where you have many things that we think about parts of the world right now where those things don't exist at all, or where there's great threats to those. You are not experiencing that at all. You're experiencing a bounty of the profits, the rewards of having practiced well in the past. All of that came through the force of the Buddhas. It's kind of interesting. I mean, they talk about the Buddhas being kind of the source of all virtue, because without beings that guide us into engaging in these behaviors, we don't create those causes. Anything that you feel like, oh, well, but I kind of doing that on my own. Well, chances are the Buddha's influenced you at some point to adopt those sorts of behaviors. You're just perhaps a little more acclimated to them, so you naturally fall into those behaviors in this life, those more virtuous behaviors. The Buddhas are kind of the beings behind the curtain for everything that is wholesome in this world. Not to say that sentient beings don't have any wholesome kind of bones in their body or brain cells in their brain, whatever. The idea is that all of those good things are under the influence, the guiding influence of these enlightened beings, whether they're called Jesus or Krishna or, Muhammad or Christ. I'm sorry, I already said Christ, or Buddha. I mean, the idea is that we are being guided by enlightened forces that are trying to get us in the right direction. And they've succeeded in some ways. We've got the proof right now in terms of the good things we have in our lives. All of those things came from the blessings of the Buddha, from the Buddhas in our lives, and of course, are practicing in accord with their advice. So we've been given, in a sense, the happiness and pleasure of this and future lives by the deities. But what do? We make offerings to evil spirits instead. We don't really acknowledge the way that the Buddha and other enlightened beings have helped us. It says there that is to make offerings and go for refuge to mundane gods. Again, mundane gods are those beings who are not enlightened. Super mundane means those beings who have at least attained a state of having realized emptiness directly and are on the learning path on their way to enlightenment or liberation. We want to depend upon and make offerings to the beings who we owe all of this to, because they've allowed for us to have all the pleasures and happiness of this and future lives, through teaching us about karma, through teaching us to engage in good morality. The second line, having practiced the guiding Dharma, we deceive the jewels. Is that due to lacking confidence in the objects of refuge, the three jewels, we do not engage in good actions and avoid bad actions in accordance with the law of actions and results. So although we kind of put forward that we are practicing the Dharma and that we're dedicated to the Dharma, we kind of deceive the jewels by not behaving in accord with the advice that they're giving us, all right? So that's kind of the idea behind that verse. We have both of those kinds of incorporated in there. We owe to the three jewels, especially the Buddha and the Dharma that was given to us, all of what we have that is wonderful in our lives. So we have to respect that and honor that. But then by having made a commitment to the three jewels, we have to behave in accord with that. And so again, just all these teachings that help support just our basic Buddhist practice, that we can see the faults of that practice in terms of our when we get distorted by the mind of self-cherishing and practice the opposite. Verse 70 kind of points out one thing that is kind of interesting. At least I don't know if this is, they don't have, again, an original Sanskrit version of this text by Dhammarakshita. So this word bon, you'll see it right in the middle of the screen there. Bon is actually the sort of shamanistic, animistic tradition of Tibet that was there before Buddhism. So let's go through this, but this gives more evidence in some ways to this perhaps being more of a Tibetan text rather than an Indian text. But again, there's a lot of question, as I pointed out way earlier on in this course, about the actual source of these teachings. It says, having always stayed in isolated places, we are carried away by distraction. Having requested teachings on the holy Dharma and the sciences, we support divinations and bon. Again, the Bon tradition still exists. And actually what's kind of interesting is that I've heard Bon teachers that, for example, at the Kala Chakra initiation in Graz, Austria, that I had the good fortune to attend because it wasn't horribly far from where I was staying in Italy, and a number of us went up there for that initiation. They had not only teachers from the four traditions that gave an evening lecture, the ones I mentioned earlier, the Nyingma, Kagyu, Sakya, and Gelug, but they also had someone from the Bon tradition. And it was really quite interesting. It sounds exactly like Buddhism. And I think that's because that whole tradition that was, again, a bit more shamanistic and what have you, has adopted the Buddhist principles. And so I think there was even some sort of movement on His Holiness's part to make that a fifth school of Tibetan Buddhism, because the teachings are so close now. But anyway, the idea here is, as we'll see in the commentary, is that this means to rely upon, again, some rituals and things that are not in line with what the Buddha Dharma is teaching. So let's see what Geshe-la says. He says, even having gone to a hermitage, for instance, we are only distracted again and again by performing village rites in cities and the countryside without doing virtuous practices. even though we stay in a monastery and so forth, we're completely distracted without listening, reflecting, and studying, and senselessly wander about cities and the countryside. So again, this was that first line that says, having always stayed in isolated places, we are carried away by distraction. So that's talking about the fact that even though you might have this condition, which monks and nuns do, some of them possess, of being sort of isolated and separated from the busyness of the world, they still can find a trap of wanting to get involved in worldly activities. They use the example of kind of going and performing rites. I guess this is something that would happen in Tibet frequently, is that you have like a local lama who is a reincarnated lama identified by somebody who is, the reincarnation of the previous lama there. And they become kind of the go-to person for performing certain rituals and rites that need to be done, pujas, what have you. And so sometimes people who, even though they're professing to be these kinds of revered figures and have these great qualities, they get caught up in wanting to get the offerings for doing these things. And so they're constantly going out to these sorts of activities, even though they're supposed to be isolating their mind from those worldly activities out of a desire for money, perhaps even reputation. When you apply that to ourselves, we can see again that, we might even be trying to isolate ourselves, not just physically, but perhaps even mentally from a lot of worldly activities. But nonetheless, we still have our entanglement with all of those things. I think in our world, it's very hard. I was teaching last night at Tupten Noberling here on concentration and the preponderance of distraction in our society. And my gosh, there's just so much that can distract us. You have to be very careful in guarding our minds that we're not constantly being drawn out to all of these various things. We want to have some sort of mental isolation as well. So don't take this verse as solely meaning those beings who happen to live in monasteries and kind of a bit more isolated physically, but also what we're trying to accomplish mentally. It takes a very strong mind to kind of be out in the world and not get distracted by the affairs of the world at whatever level, talking about, wars and things going on politically and what have you, as well as just your family and friends and the dramas and the things that are happening. We want to protect our minds. That is like the most important job in all of Buddhism, right? So just have to be attentive to that. Let's go back and see what Geshe-la says about the second line. In addition, having requested teachings on the Holy Dharma, such as the stages of the path to enlightenment, the Lam Rim, or having listened to the scriptural systems, reflected upon them, and so forth, without putting effort into practicing their meaning in order to trick others, we strive in divinations and so forth, and put effort only into Bon. In brief, village rites illustrated by ransom rites, exorcism rites, and the like. So even though we get all of this learning, we requested all these teachings, we studied the Lam Rim, we end up getting caught up in kind of rituals that don't have a whole lot of meaning, perhaps. Divinations that we're doing for others, these sorts of rites that are described there. Again, I don't want to, because these sorts of things, you might not identify with them at all when you're reading this, right? You go, well, I'm not going to be caught up in doing exorcism rites, not something that I'm being asked to do, nor do I have any desire to do. But again, we can find ourselves being enticed into doing things that fall outside of the Dharma, right? Suddenly somebody's knocking on our door or calling us or texting us or whatever and inviting us to something that we know is just not going to be conducive to having a good mind. We're going to go and get caught up in desire, get caught up in attachments, get caught up in other things. And so we have to be very careful. Again, we have to be delicate in those things and not kind of push people away with a lack of compassion and concern for them, but rather be very clear about where our own boundaries are. So again, that's another way of sort of interpreting that, because once we start to really follow the Lam Rim, it's very clear in terms of how we are to practice and the sorts of things that we are to do. And we need to try to support that through our behavior and through the things that we expose ourselves to. At our, sorry, I'm bringing up some recent things, but I was just at our interfaith meeting today, and we got into a whole discussion about this too, about kind of the world that we live in and how there are so many really negative influences too. It's not just distractions. It's a lot of things that are really quite negative. if you look at even the entertainment industry and so many movies that are about violence and revenge and all these sorts of really movies that are so anti-dharma. They're not, we don't generally tend to go to movies where people behave really ethically and purely and what have you, right? People like entertainment where everybody's being kind of a bad guy and getting away with all kinds of stuff and punishing the evildoers and what have you. And even in the world at large, when we see what's going on in Israel and Gaza and what have you, there's that mentality, just always trying to put people in their place, seek revenge, have a way of retaliating. And obviously, this isn't something that leads to any real lasting peace. You go back to the slides just again. I like to make sure that I'm not forgetting things. Oh, I do have a little to share on this verse, so I'm glad I went back there. This is from, again, Venerable Chodron. I think almost everything I have to share tonight is from her. It says, although we hear teachings from sublime Dharma scriptures in a direct lineage from the Buddha, instead of cherishing this rare fortune, we spend our time and energy on divination and shamanism. I mean, I do know some people who are involved in Buddhism who do tend to put a high reliance on things that are not really Buddhist. They're, I don't know. I mean, you can get lamas to do divinations, and maybe that's a little different when it's a lama you feel a connection with. But it says here, divinations and shamanistic practices were in Tibet before Buddhism came, again with the Bon tradition, and they remain popular. They still are something that lamas are asked to do frequently. While some people find them helpful, and doing these practices doesn't interfere with their refuge in the Three Jewels, other people get very distracted by them, to the extent that their refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha is adversely affected, right? So we do have, again, those, some people fall under the influence of these things and they put more faith in those than they do in the Three Jewels. The Western version, she says, of getting distracted by divination and shamanism is becoming fascinated with New Age philosophies, crystals, astrology, tarot cards, and opening our third eye. There was that one series of books about the third eye and what have you. You can become fascinated with these kind of really exotic and esoteric sorts of things. Alternatively, some people become mesmerized by playing the stock market or trading currencies or gambling. I mean, gambling on betting on football games and going to the casinos and what have you. We may talk about Dharma, future lives, liberation, and full awakening, but we live according to what will immediately benefit our present lives, right? Trying to get that, make that bet, produce the rewards, try to, get the money from the stock market, whatever. We're acting totally antithetical to what Dharma is about, which is at least being concerned about future lives, much less liberation and enlightenment, which of course are the main goals. But rather, we live with this mindset on just getting good results now. She says actually looking at our own minds and changing them is much more arduous than going to a psychic or tarot reader or following the latest fad that will supposedly cure our dissatisfaction. Staying focused on the path to awakening takes great effort and concentration. So she's giving a bit of an admonishment here, to make sure that we see that it is difficult and we do have to put the time and energy into it, and don't look for those kind of immediate results there in the same way that we expect them in our external pleasures. If attaining Buddhahood were easy, she says, all of us surely would have become enlightened by now. This is without a doubt, right? Therefore, let's develop faith based on reasoning and through wisdom remain focused on the path. So it's kind of some nice advice. That's why I included it in here, is because she really does kind of speak to the fact that we have to be careful about, once more, where we're sort of what are we putting our money on, talking about betting or gambling. What are we having our faith in? As we learn the Dharma and practice the Dharma, we should be getting greater and greater faith in that, and less of a kind of trying to manipulate the external world to get the pleasure that we seek right now. Again, there's nothing wrong with having pleasure in our lives right now. Don't get me wrong. We aren't supposed to be living a sort of ascetic life. This was also a lesson from the life of the Buddha as Prince Siddhartha, when he practiced with these practitioners who encouraged him to starve the body and so on, and he became emaciated and was incapable of achieving the realizations that he sought. That's not the path that we're talking about. We're talking about the fact that even if you have pleasures in your life, you don't keep going chasing after those. Like that's the be all and end all of being a human, of having this human existence. If you have nice things in your life, enjoy them. And again, in the spirit of Tonglen, which we haven't talked about for a couple of classes, offer that to others. Think of others while you're enjoying the good food that you have created the karma to enjoy. Okay, so you have it. Make good use of it. Offer it to the three jewels. Offer it to other beings through the practice of Tonglen. Try to use the things that we have in a very virtuous way. It's again another important part of our practice, so that we continue to have those things and can continue to use them in that more virtuous way. Let's go to Geshe-la's commentary to go through this next verse, verse 71. Having rejected morality and liberation, we grasp to a home. It's going to be explained a little bit. There's a lack of clarity in some of Geshe-la's explanation that I don't know that I can speak to. But the idea is when we kind of give up on this path of liberation and the good morality that we're trying to practice, especially by becoming ordained, you kind of grasp back at the home life, the householder life, even though you've adopted the life of a monastic. But again, we can talk about that in lay terms as well. Then the second one, having poured our happiness and pleasure into water. This is kind of the idea of casting away that pleasure and happiness, like we just go through it. It just is, to the wind. It's what was the phrase that I had written down? Kind of a casting to the wind. The idea that these things are gone, all those happiness and pleasure that we seek. Instead, we create the pattern that causes us to chase after suffering. We just go after the things that are only going to lead to more and more suffering for ourselves and again for others. So the first line, Geshe-la says, if we guard the cause, completely pure morality, we will attain its result, the liberation or non-abiding nirvana. Remember, morality, as I just explained earlier tonight, is the foundation of our practices, helps us to develop concentration, wisdom, which are essential to attaining liberation, and also Buddhahood or non-abiding nirvana. And I think I've explained this, but non-abiding in that we're not abiding in the solitary peace of those who are on the Hinayana path that just attain their own liberation and kind of check out of samsara, nor are we abiding in samsara under the control of all the afflictions. As a Buddha, you're not abiding in either extreme. You're able to manifest in the world for beings, but you're not kind of checked out of the world completely. You don't have to suffer yourself, but nonetheless, you continue to be involved in the world. Then it says, it is suitable to take this to be both a great home and a small home. And we say that you rejected morality and liberation to then grasp to a home. He explained in his commentary on his commentary what a great home is, but not a small home. So he says, as explained before, but I could find nowhere in the commentary previously when I've done this course that speaks to what those two, how they are differentiated, a great home and small home. The most important one, however, is grasping to a great home. In other words, having practiced the Dharma to once again return to a home, to the householder life, without making progress in the trainings and so forth. By the force of that, although we wish for that which is desirable and happiness, what we do is that we chase after it in a way that abundantly procures only suffering, and pour all the happiness and pleasure of this and future lives into water, kind of cast it away to the wind, right? In the sense that they become utterly inexistent. We don't even create the causes for any sort of happiness and pleasure because we go chasing after the causes of suffering. And whose fault is this? It's the self-cherishing mind. So one way of kind of working with this within the idea of lay people is not just that, those people who adopted the pratimoksha vows and become ordained, and then they've kind of gone back to the householder life, which Geshe-la in his commentary on this, he said, this happens way too frequently and it's unfortunate. And some people might feel they have very good reasons to disrobe and to return to the householder, the lay life. But if they examine, probably a good part of them are due to self-cherishing. I remember there was one wonderful monk. I really admired him greatly. He just seemed like he was just the model, the exemplar of, practicing monastic vows. And there was a woman who showed up at the institute, and they started talking, and he was teaching her, and eventually he disrobed, and the two of them became a couple, and da 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 da. Well, any sort of romantic interest in anyone else is generally rooted in some self-cherishing. It has to do with us wanting someone else to help satisfy the cravings and desires that we have, because most romantic relationships have some element of sexual desire involved in them, what have you. All of these things are evidence of self-cherishing generally. Not that you can't engage in a romantic relationship with a pure kind of other cherishing mentality that's really about the other person. That's kind of a more ideal way to work with that. But generally, in romantic love, you have that mind of attachment and that mind of desire. And it's like, what are you going to do for me? Even though you're also doing things for the other person. Jampa Gendon, who was the teaching assistant in Italy, he said one of his teachers said, because this whole topic of about two people becoming a couple so that they can practice the Dharma together, he says, people don't get into relationships to practice the Dharma. And it's kind of true. I'm not saying that you can't use a relationship as a support for your practice of the Dharma, but that's usually not why you go into a relationship. You don't, put a little ad or whatever, or go to any of these apps and kind of put in seeking Dharma partner to help me practice, abandoning my self-cherishing and self-grasping. You're looking for something else generally in a relationship. Relationships can be amazing supports for the practice of the Dharma when you're dedicated to using them in that way and to being, kind of working with the other person and them working with you and trying to help each other in your practice. And I would hope that those of you who are involved in relationships at least have some element of that in there. But the idea here is that if we are kind of abandoning and letting go of the path and that, and we kind of grasp at these more mundane aspects of the householder's life, of the pleasures and what have you of being in relationship, and kind of abandon the Dharma that's really there to help us to achieve more lasting results, then this is the mind of self-cherishing that's doing it. That's getting you caught up in following your desires and not being more serious about how you are engaging in the householder life. So again, from a monk or a nun going to a householder, it's a little more clear, but from those of us who make a determination to practice the Dharma, if we find that our home life and the things that we're engaging in our other aspects of our life are not supporting our practice, but are taking us further and further away, well, then again, as was said, they're going to become the causes of future suffering, and they're going to throw out all of our potential for future happiness and well-being, all the way up to enlightenment. Though again, the main thing that's being talked about here is the happiness of future lives and what have you. Okay, let's go to the slides just to make sure I'm not missing something there. Having rejected the crossing to liberation, we roam about in remote places. One translation has the wilderness instead of remote places. And that means kind of essentially by remote places or wilderness, we mean kind of places that don't support Dharma or that aren't about Dharma. We rejected the crossing to liberation, what will actually take us to that goal. And instead, we put our attention and roam about in places that have nothing to do with Dharma, bars and dance places and whatever. Having obtained a precious human body, we accomplish the hells. So while we've attained what is said to be the ideal state of existence to practice the Dharma, we end up only accomplishing through this perfect human rebirth the state of a hell being. So again, this is something we need to be concerned about, obviously, is that's our self-cherishing mind that's manifesting, that's keeping us from accomplishing what it is that we really need to do with this perfect life. Geshe-la says, having rejected the crossing to liberation, that is, practicing the path for attaining liberation, we roam about in remote places. That is, we wander in distant areas. Again, this is how he describes it, but we can see it symbolically of kind of wandering to those places where the Dharma isn't really supported. Remote lands or distant lands are often used as an analogy for the places where the Dharma doesn't exist or isn't being practiced. So if we, you can certainly apply it to just kind of wandering all over the world if you want, but the idea is here is that you're going to all those places and distractions that don't support your practice of the Dharma because you're not kind of really fully adopting the path to liberation. The second sentence, Having obtained this precious human body, complete in the 8 leisures and 10 endowments. I'm not going to go into all 18 of those. If you've studied the Lam Rim, they are set out in the topic of precious or perfect human rebirth. They speak to the freedoms we possess that are ideal for practicing the Dharma and what we are endowed with that give us all the resources needed to be able to practice well. He says, not only do we not practice the holy Dharma, even though we've been given that, we definitely accumulate bad actions, complete in the phases of the preparation, the actual performance, and the conclusion with respect to negative non-virtues. This is one way of presenting negative actions, that there's always a preparation before we engage in it, the actual performance of that negative action, and then the conclusion. When we talk about it in the teachings on karma and the Lam Rim, there's sometimes said to be 4 branches, but these 3 are used in some context to speak about kind of how we get involved in negativity. So instead of using this perfect human rebirth to accomplish something good, even at least another good rebirth, as it says there, whereby, since these are like the hells, we accomplish the hells. Because those actions have the ability, when they are complete, to lead us to a lower rebirth. And if they're very powerful, we can end up with a hellish existence from those. So again, we have to be careful. We've got this perfect human rebirth. Use it well. Don't waste it. Otherwise, again, it's the mind of self-cherishing that is behind all of that. Verse 73, first 2 lines, having set aside the transformative attributes of the Dharma, we make a profit. So this is pretty clear. Instead of following the Dharma and being attentive to that, we get totally caught up in business and making a profit. Again, that's one of these 8 worldly concerns, totally preoccupied with material gain and getting all the wonderful things that come from that. Having left behind our Lama's Dharma classes, we wander about the cities and countryside. So this is said to be, again, it can be the physical wandering of just kind of going out and about and going every which place. But the idea is that we are leaving behind what is most precious, the teachings that we can gain from our lamas. So the first commentary on the first Geshe-la says, the transformative attributes of the Dharma means that our mind is transformed in dependence on practicing the holy Dharma. And this is, again, being set aside. Having set aside the development of the special realizations of the path in our continuum, we instead make a profit, such as putting effort into a business and so forth. So again, you have the choice. We all have the choice. We can choose to adopt the Dharma and go that path, or get totally involved in the preoccupation of having a career that's very rewarding and fulfilling in terms of mundane affairs, but is not going to get you anywhere necessarily. I mean, we can still do our work and make a profit with good motivation, but this is where the motivation is self-cherishing, is deluding. Then the second line, through disregarding negativities, downfalls, and bad talk, we accomplish only the causes of the bad migrations. Without listening to the Dharma from our lamas and without going to pujas, Dharma classes, and so forth, we also put effort on a daily basis into wandering about the cities and countryside. So that last sentence is the one pertaining to the second line. Sorry, that other sentence is kind of a continuation. So again, we have to be careful where we put our priorities. Our teachers, especially the lamas now, and then we don't have maybe as many lamas kind of coming through as what there were some years ago, with Rinpoche no longer with us in a physical presence, and His Holiness pretty much grounded in India at this point. He doesn't do any travel, I believe, outside of maybe India and that general locale. We don't feel like maybe there's that much access, but these beings, Rinpoche's teachings are all over the place. You can find them, you can practice them, you can follow them, and we should be putting our attention into making sure that we're receiving Dharma teachings as frequently as possible, not just these teachings you're going to hear with me, but from these great masters who have great realizations and who have greater understanding of the Dharma than certainly what I possess. And then His Holiness teaches from Dharamsala and other parts of India frequently. You just get on the list and you can see when teachings are coming up and what have you. And it's important to take advantage of these beings while they're here and capable of helping us on our path through the teachings that they're giving out of their compassion and concern for us, and not instead, as it says here, wander elsewhere, which again can be physically going to various places, but it can also mean the mind that just kind of wanders towards our other preoccupations. There's lots of things that we can do with our time. I don't think we have any shortage of that. As I mentioned earlier, there are plenty of distractions in our world these days. Let me actually go back to the slides because again, I don't think missing things there because then it becomes kind of silly to go back. Okay, verse 74. Having forsaken our own means of livelihood, we appropriate community property. Having given up earning our own food, we steal it from others. This one seems to also in the commentary to be primarily about ordained Sangha that are living in community. There are particular rules around ordained communities in that anything that is given to the community belongs to the community, that there's no individual property per se. And so you have to be meticulous if you're living in that type of situation. And there may even be lay centers where people live with that agreement as well, that what is there is to support the entire community. It's not meant for individual use. And the second line that, we are sort of acquiring our food by stealing or taking things from others is in kind of a similar vein, rather than becoming our own source of livelihood and what have you. So let's see what Geshe-la says about this. Having forsaken, without being able to earn, the necessities and so forth that are our own means of livelihood, we appropriate community property from the mouths of the Sangha. Nowadays, it often happens that people who hand out money offerings and the like, which is appropriate community property, but this is very dangerous and a huge error. For example, if, having taken one single bit of leaves from however many bricks of tea there are that were meant for the Sangha by others, we use it, which is, as said, from appropriating community property, rebirth in the great hell, our destination will be none other than hell. So I think he's quoting here from, we have that phrase, appropriate community property in the first line, but this may even be from one of the vows that we take when you're ordained. That from appropriating anything that belongs to the community for your individual use, the resultant karma is rebirth in the great hell. Kind of threatening, but it's because you need to respect that when things are given to the community, the Sangha, there's an intention that benefits the entire Sangha. Even stealing a few leaves, tea leaves, from a brick of tea would be a transgression. Therefore, having understood that appropriating community property, whether great or small, as well as stealing and appropriating others' wealth due to being unable to earn our own food, wealth, and so forth, are also done out of self-cherishing, we again make that statement to rant and rave on the head of the conception that brings about our ruin and so forth. Okay, I think that may be all that we have time for tonight, but let me talk a little bit about this one in terms of how do we interpret that as lay people if you're not in a situation where you're involved in community property. Well, then what does that mean? I think we can look at it from some perspective about what belongs to the world at large and being kind of a little more careful and are kind of wanting resources for ourselves as opposed to letting them be there for the benefit of others. Certainly this is part of what's gotten us into the difficulties that we're facing with climate change, right? Is this desire to procure so many resources, and the developed world has certainly taken the larger share of resources for its well-being compared to those countries that are, they call them developing countries, but the idea is that certainly they don't have the standard of living that we experience here in the West. And so we have to be very, very careful with that and try to be mindful in our choice of things and what we decide to do so that we're not kind of compounding all of that through our karma that is really just appropriating things that are kind of belonging to all of humanity in a sense, not just to us. For those of us who live in the West and have resources and abundance and so many things, that when you go to other parts of the world, such as Nepal or India, and you see people who are bereft of those sorts of things, it's can be kind of eye-opening to see what we have and the riches that we possess, and yet we get so bent out of shape even at some of the smallest things that pertain to those resources. So to have, again, a bit more of a generous mind, a mind that's not always looking to satisfy ourselves. And that's kind of how we could apply it to some degree with regard to us who are lay practitioners, householders. Let's not be so caught up in acquiring things, and think about those subtle ways that we are perhaps stealing from others by being over excessive in our use of resources in our lives. to be somewhat mindful of that. So, and to be generous with resources to others. Certainly that's the antidote often too, right? Is to not take from them and steal, but to give what we have, to find some charities perhaps that are producing food for people in parts of the world that are impoverished, or giving medical care, or whatever types of things that are involved in the well-being of others who are not as fortunate as ourselves. So that got us up through 74. I think we were supposed to go through about 78 tonight. In terms of the homework for your discussion, which I'll be happy to sit in on, though I'm hoping Bill will be happy to lead. Last week, we didn't get to the third one, for line 62a, just the first line of verse 62. If you want to talk about that, again, can go back over that verse. Bill can read it or whatever. And then I think here we got actually all of these done. Yes, except the last 76a. So the ones that were on the screen there, the first four, those have been covered. So you can talk about them again. Sometimes I'm having just individual lines. And of course, in this one where you have the refrain, I'm never going to ask again for like a commentary on the refrain, because the refrain's already what it is. So, all right, I think I've talked enough. Let me hand the baton over to Bill. You are going to lead today, yes, Bill?
Sure, I can.
Okay, wonderful. All right. So I'm going to tune out for just a minute so I can use the restroom, and then I'll be back. But I'll just kind of be a fly on the wall. So please, I really encourage everyone to, say something if you can, just really share. I know sometimes it's not as comfortable and you may feel like you have nothing to share, but I think you all do, something's come up for you tonight, I would hope, with some of the lines I've chosen. And if you find that those aren't working, if there's really something you're burning to talk about that I covered tonight, maybe bring that up. And again, if there are any questions on any of this, we'll come back about 5 minutes before we end, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. Okay, have fun.
62A is our commitments are great, yet our beneficial practice is small. Our reputation is great, yet when examined would embarrass the deities and spirits. So does anybody want to take that one? Or did that bring up anything for anybody? I guess most of us don't feel like we're that high up, but nobody?
Well, I'll comment. I think as I have gotten older, I think I felt I knew more when I was younger than when I feel like I know now. And I think that's sort of a similar sort of a mental attitude. I felt like I was a better Buddhist at the start than I feel like I am now. I feel like I didn't have a really concept of what it actually meant to practice, and how deeply embedded all the afflictions and the self-grasping and the self-cherishing, and it's sort of like as you peel the onion back, you're like, oh yeah. Yeah, it looked better. It looked better at the start. It looked easier. It looked, so I'm more humble, and
Yeah,
yeah, more patient. I try to keep my mouth shut, well, and think about what I'm going to say before I say it. And I like the "I don't know" phrase.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can all think of times when we were um less skillful about explaining things to people. Maybe thought we knew more than we did. I thought just like this group of verses was just really about just the anytime you have self-cherishing, like corrupting your spiritual practice, like your actual practice, kind of applies in all these different ways. Well, I like that. I think the next one is 66, A and B. So we're also talking about the refrain. So 66 is our view is lofty, yet our behavior is worse than a dog's. The basis of all our good qualities has been lost in the wind. Rant and rave on the head of the conception that brings about our ruin to the hearts of the enemy, the self, and the executioner, Mariah. Does anybody want to talk about um, A, which I guess is this idea that we have lofty views, but I guess it's kind of that you don't practice what you preach. And then this idea that Don was kind of harping on about good qualities being lost to the wind. Anybody? Or B, you can talk about B too. You want to talk about the violent language. Trying to think of a good personal experience for this one.
Do you think these all maybe just speak to how difficult it is to put this into practice? I mean, not necessarily that we're being malevolent in discarding this stuff, but just that we have these goals and we have these aspirations. But I mean, it's just really difficult. These are really difficult practices.
Yeah, I think that's pretty astute. I think it's also just becomes like it really seems to speak to this idea that, as you become a better and better practitioner, um, and you just have to be really careful of your reputation, I think. The more you practice, the more people, maybe come and want to talk to you or ask you for advice. And the more that goes on, I guess the more your guard needs to be up. Um, which I think is kind of scary. I think that's what Fran's saying. Like, I
Yeah.
guess it gets harder. So, apparently,
Yeah, the farther you go, the harder it gets. Maybe.
I mean, there's like 6 verses on this general topic, so um, I kind of think that that's what, for me, the basis of all our good qualities has been lost in the wind. I mean, I think that really kind of hammers home like what happens in all of these verses is that, if you don't guard against your self-cherishing, you can, basically just lose all your hard work. It's like you do all this work and you make like one mistake and it's all gone. That's kind of how I interpret it.
I think when they're talking about these, where people are asking your advice, I mean, that's an incredible responsibility. It's a
Mhm.
huge responsibility. And I just think you really have to guard, really have to, just watch your mind like a hawk.
It's just really easy to want to be helpful and want to be seen as like, a wise person. Just your attachment to reputation. I think the next one is, oh, I guess we were supposed to do A and B for 66. But that's okay. Oh, I guess that's this one. Yeah, so now we're on 67. Just A, which is we keep all our desires in our innermost heart. We senselessly blame all altercations on others. So yeah, I guess this is this idea that, I don't know. I feel like I was fortunate to read a lot of advice on these versus or similar advice to this, like when I was pretty early on. Which I guess could be good or bad. But yeah, I think we can all speak to the second one pretty well. It's just blaming all of our altercations on others. I don't know. I don't know if I don't know if I've been practicing long enough for the first one to. I mean, most of my desires are not that hidden. So I don't know about you guys. But yeah, does this one prick anybody in any kind of special way?
One thing that comes to mind is about we senselessly blame others is I think of projection, that concept of projection, is projection works because there's an element of truth, right? But the truth is it's you that are doing the behavior and you're blaming somebody else for it. And which is how it kind of flies, right? Is how it's kind of accepted. And also, it's you blame it you see it or blame it in other people because you have it in yourself. I've heard that, is that's how you that's why you can, that's why you're always kind of connecting out to others what you yourself know, think, feel, have done. I'm just repeating what
Projection.
somebody else has said. Yeah.
Projection.
Yeah.
Somebody raise a hand, or is that just me? Oh, weird. I think that was AI. Saw that I had my hand up. Unless somebody clicked on it. Weird. The next one is 69, which is, I kind of like these ones about like the shamanistic traditions. Having been given happiness and pleasure by the deities, we make offerings to evil spirits. Having practiced the guiding dharma, we deceive the jewels. What evil spirits do you make offerings to? I guess would be the question to ask yourself. I don't feel like you have to share that with us.
I make offerings to the evil spirits of cinnamon rolls and spaghetti.
Food.
Yeah.
This is the television, cell phone, whatever other idols that you've got. I don't know. This is one of those ones that I think is hard for householders, as they say. I think the next one, I like this one too. There's a lot of parallels here. I know that technically, it might just be the translator. Having rejected morality and liberation, we grasp to a home. Having poured our happiness and pleasure into water, we chase after suffering. I kind of like these metaphors. I was trying to surmise what the small home might be. Which I guess is what they're warning about, like a few verses above here. So, I don't know.
This might be really off base, but could the small home and the big home be like analogous to Hinayana and Mahayana?
Yeah, I kind of felt it was like two, I kind of saw it as two different levels, maybe, was what I was thinking. Like the great home. Let me see here. I want to read Geshe-La's commentary. What does he say again? Well, that's the evil spirits one. Sorry. Oh, if we guard the cause completely pure morality, we will attain its result, the liberation of non-abiding nirvana. Otherwise, having rejected both this cause and its result, we grasp to a home. It is suitable to take this to be both a great home and a small home.
Mm.
The most important one, however, is grasping to a great home. In other words, having practiced the Dharma to once again return home without making progress in the trainings and so forth. I kind of thought maybe the small home would be like making some progress, but not seeing it through. You know, maybe like the great home is like you go and, you know, you got really involved, but you really didn't have any realizations. But maybe the other one, yeah, I don't know. I just maybe thought it was maybe degrees. But again, we don't really know. And by the force of that, although we wish for that which is desirable and happiness, what we do is that we chase after it in a way that abundantly procures only suffering, and pour all the happiness and pleasure of this and future lives into water. in a sense that it becomes utterly non-existent, inexistent. So yeah, I kind of feel like this is a lot like Don said, making that parallel to our virtue blowing away in the wind. It's kind of like another warning to like see it through, is I think how I would interpret it. And then, oh, we weren't even supposed to talk about that one. I got it wrong. It's 73, which is having set aside the transformative attributes of the Dharma, we make a profit. Having left behind our lamas' Dharma classes, we wander about the cities and countryside. I always feel weird about these ones. Because I still go out and talk to people. And I just really try hard not to break my vows. But I don't just try and avoid people. You know. Like I feel like I could go to the discotheque and not break my vows. But I don't know, maybe I'm being naive. Obviously, I'd have less chance of breaking them if I just stayed home. But I don't know, anybody want to speak to that, to this idea? Kind of being out in the town. Sounds like. Okay. Kona's showing up in the blur. Girl, go lay down. You don't need to go out there. No? Well, I don't think we got to the one after this one. So there's Don. Maybe he'll stimulate you.
Yeah, I mean, I did listen to a little bit of what was discussed. I might add one thing on 69. Remember, verse 69 had that line about propitiating the evil spirits or whatever. We make offerings to evil spirits, having been given happiness and pleasure by the deities, which again means the Buddhas. And that's, I probably should have put this in my little slides because she has a wonderful little phrase in here. Uh-oh, my cat is chewing on my headphone cord. So, this is page 146 of Good Karma. She says, propitiating malevolent spirits could mean following the eight worldly concerns. I think I may have even mentioned that when I commented on that. Trying to make a quick buck, cheating on our partner, feeding our addiction to video games and texting, spending our time creating alternate personalities in online games. I've never done that one, but it could also mean taking refuge in evil spirits and making offerings to them in order to attain our worldly aim. So she mostly talked about it in terms of the first part of, you know, that's what our evil spirits are. So I was glad that all of you sort of picked up on that, you know. What was it you said?
Nobody
Fran,
would
about-
say what their evil spirits were, though.
Yeah. I don't know.
Fran
if it was
did.
Fran, yeah, the cinnamon rolls, and what was the other thing? Pizza or something? I can't remember.
Spaghetti.
Pardon? You know, so we yeah, we have to kind of watch where our loyalties go in terms of all of these good things we have in our lives come through the influence of the Buddhas, and we wouldn't have any of them. So we have to be careful how we relate to them, in a sense, I think is what that verse is saying to some extent. You know, where do you put your real faith? Anyway. But yeah, I think you all touched on some of the good points in terms of these. That last one, 73, especially the first line, having set aside the transformative attributes of the Dharma, we make a profit. Yeah, I think it is hard as Dharma practitioners who are lay people, householders, to balance the Dharma life with your working life or other aspects of your life. But I guess, again, if we really think that the purpose, what we're here for is to practice the spiritual life. And if we make kind of that be our main motivation with whatever we do, so you can bring bodhicitta to almost anything that you do. Even, of course, some non-virtue can be transferred or transformed into virtue by way of the mind of bodhicitta, but that's very hard to do. But at least our mundane activities, because any job that people have is generally about serving someone else, right? There's somebody involved, there's a customer, there's a client, there's people that are on the receiving end of whatever it is that you do. You know, even if you're like just someone supporting a superior by helping them with their administration of things and whatever, it's something involving other people. So we can kind of bring that motivation of cherishing others, thinking of others, trying to be of service to others, to almost any occupation. But here the idea of the verse is when you sort of give up on the Dharma, set aside the potential that you have to really do something meaningful with the Dharma that's in your life, and you just become totally obsessed with work and trying to, acquire resources, reputation, whatever. Now we see this again, not maybe as prevalent in Dharma practitioners, but certainly in the world at large. And people become totally obsessed with kind of how far can I go up the ladder, and getting, because of course we have a capitalist society that pays people a whole lot more the further up you go, and even things that are way out of balance in terms of what these higher up corporate leaders and what have you get versus the workers who are in the factories and things like that. So there's a real enticement in many people's lives to get all of that, to want all of that. But what for? If you're only feeding the self-cherishing mind, if you're only feeding your own desire, and you might think, well, these people often are doing this for their families, but that's still self-cherishing because it's the people that you care about that are in your life. You're not really doing it for the welfare of other beings in a more profound way. You're doing it because those beings are important to you. They are an extension of your self-cherishing in a sense. And that's what attachment is it's like being attached to all of those things that we see as an extension of ourselves. And so you might be, again, deceiving yourself if you think that you're doing these jobs for other people, when really it's still the beings that you care about and not really doing it with good motivation. So I guess that's kind of the idea, is that we can still do some of these things with good motivation, but we have to watch it, to make sure that we're balancing and not really getting totally caught up in our mundane affairs, because it is a trap. You see, in Asian culture, you have obviously had a supporting of people who do decide at an early age even, or sometimes later, to go into the monastic life. And in the West, we don't often have that option. I don't know if I mentioned it, one of these verses, Geshe-la did comment when he was talking about that there are many people certainly who live lives as if they were lay people, even though they're ordained, because of whatever the conditions are. They feel that they need to have the resources that are afforded through having a job and what have you. And I've known many people in the FPMT who are ordained who continue to be involved in the working world. And again, sometimes Rinpoche or a guru would recommend that to them, thinking that it was of benefit to them to be doing that with their life. But again, you have to watch this. It's a very tricky thing. We all need resources to live, without a doubt. And most of us are not going to be handed that on a silver platter from somewhere else. So we have to engage in some type of livelihood, but make sure that that doesn't become what it's all about. I think we probably talked too much on that. Any other comments or questions from tonight? Okay, so you've got a little bit to work with. Again, with these verses, I would encourage you to take a look at anything we discussed tonight that you kind of were nodding your head and going, oh yeah, I can see that I do that. Well, then that's your initial cue in to say, okay, this is something I want to become more aware of over the next week, is when that is manifesting in my mind, when I'm seeing those particular patterns of behavior. And try to do the switcheroo, try to think about others at that point. As I mentioned in the motivation, some of the things that we do that are habitual and that fall into this category are not, maybe not directly harming others. Like you may think there's no problem with me treating myself to, ice cream every day because, I really enjoy my ice cream and it just becomes this pleasure thing that I'm just really attached to. And you might think, well, no one's being harmed by me eating ice cream every day. And to some degree, you might be right. I mean, it's really pretty indirect harm. What little bit of ice cream you eat, compared to the amount of ice cream that exists in the world, you're not being kind of overly greedy. Nobody's going without ice cream because you're eating it or what have you. But remember that that means that you're buying into that mind of self-cherishing and you're not using that experience in a positive way. As I said, the pleasurable experience in and of itself isn't the problem. It's what we're doing when we continue to follow those things with the mind of attachment, with the mind of self-cherishing. Because we're putting ourselves more and more distant from enlightenment. It was that, thing of 3 steps forward, 2 steps back kind of thing. We might think we're going in, but every time we follow this mind, we go a couple of steps back. So just be mindful of that, see how it's working and see if you can, if you're going to make those decisions to have that bowl of ice cream every day or whatever the case is, then you do something positive with that. Again, there's all these wonderful practices that Rinpoche would recommend of converting that into something virtuous by having the mind of bodhicitta, by offering that to others, by thinking of that experience in a different way. And you get the pleasure of putting the ice cream in your mouth and swallowing it or whatever, but you also accumulate some merit along the way. And when you have a mind that is thinking of others and thinking about offering it to others, you can't have attachment arise, really, because that's not the thought that's there. It's not all about me and getting this experience for myself. So I would encourage you, if you can, to work with these teachings over the next week like that. And if your little pet thing that you thought of in the meditation tonight isn't a part of these, meditations that we've gone through, the verses we've gone through, then just use that. You don't have to, it doesn't have to be one of these things that's been singled out by Dharma Rakshita that are evidence of the way that self-cherishing manifests in our behavior. So, okay. Any questions? Then let's do our dedication prayers. Okay, I'll put that on the screen. And we'll begin with the, oops, but it didn't go. With the dedication prayer, the general one about dedicating for the attainment of enlightenment, so you can then help all beings to also attain Buddhahood. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. So again, remember, cherishing others, this antidote to self-cherishing, is a part of the jewel bodhicitta that we are trying to grow. So we can, as you reflect on that verse, think that you're also making that strong wish. May your cherishing of other beings that hasn't arisen arise and grow, and may that which has not diminish, but rather increase. Okay. Then the prayers for our precious teachers, as we recite the first prayer there for His Holiness, and we realize the importance of having His Holiness in this world, and that we want to continue to have Him and other beings with good health, very long lives, have all their wishes fulfilled. Bring all of that to mind for all the gurus as we recite this. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And while we're reciting for gurus, we might make a special dedication for Geshe Dodo Namgyal, who is the Geshe up at Sravasti Abbey that I know a lot of you have a connection to and have probably heard the news of his having disappeared a week ago today now, and making strong prayers for his very quick and safe return. And just leave it at that, but just really strong prayers for the best possible outcome in regard to his being missing at this time. Then in regard to Rinpoche, our precious guide, our spiritual director, who has left that physical form, we want him to return as swiftly as possible, so we'll recite that prayer together. Peerless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losong father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now. Holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable Venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and from other living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. And lastly, any beings that we know of that we're holding in our hearts, or certainly parts of the world where there's war, strife of whatever form, we're making strong prayers by sending out this merit to them that they may have their suffering alleviated immediately. Whoever those beings are, again, that we feel some strong karmic connection to, some compassion for. I think that it also becomes the cause to help them to have complete, perfect happiness. And then finally just think, and through these efforts, may this be the result for all beings. May they all be free from suffering and find perfect peace and happiness. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I checked tonight before coming on and I didn't see any updates at Shavasti Abbey's website. So it's really quite distressing to hear that going on. But I was asked actually earlier in the week, I can mention this, I think Ruth wanted to know what to do. And again, I think it's just really important that we keep a positive mind and also do perhaps green Tara prayers. It seems like they are doing a fair amount of green Tara practice, Tara pujas, and green Tara practice in general. So reciting Tara's mantra with visualization and trying to create the cause for, again, all whatever obstacles exist for beings to not have Geshe-la there, that we want to try to remove that. Because if this is a Buddha from the side of Geshe Dado Namgyal, well, then he doesn't necessarily need our prayers. We need the prayers to manifest so that he can continue to be in this world. So again, whatever is happening in regard to that, I think green Tara practice is a really wonderful way to create that kind of merit of removing obstacles. But again, I'm not sure what other advice is coming from Venerable Children and Shavasti Abbey, but yeah, just keep positive about it. So, all right, thank you all. Have a good week, and I will see you all next Tuesday. Okay, be well.
Thank you
And,
very much for the
My
teaching.
cat Hita says goodbye if I can get her to come up to the screen. Bye.
Shut a cutie. Thank you so much.
Okay, be well, everyone. See you.